Ready to go? You ready? Good morning. The committee will come to order, and thank you all for being here today. To begin with, I ask unanimous consent that a former member of the committee, Ms. Titus, be allowed to sit at the dais and ask questions. She's had a great interest in this issue for years. Hearing no objections, so ordered. This hearing will focus on VA's implementation of the Veterans Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act of 2017, or thankfully we'll have the acronym AMA, which substantially reforms VA's appeals process. This topic is important to each one of us on this panel. And in fact, every member of this committee is an original co-sponsor of the legislation. We all agree that the success of this reform is critical because the current appeals process is failing veterans miserably. Right now, VA has a backlog of more than 470,000 appeals, and many veterans will end up waiting at least 6 years just for the decision on their appeal. And I can assure you that every one of us in our districts are hearing this, and every veteran town hall that I hear, there's much focus on this issue. Veterans and their families deserve better. They deserve to have the VA decide their appeals accurately and within a reasonable amount of time. During the previous administration, then Secretary McDonald brought VSOs and other veterans advocates together to develop a legislative proposal to address the appeals backlog. Secretary Shulkin continued to work with VSOs to improve the original proposal. This committee took the current proposal and worked on a bipartisan basis to get it through the House and sent it to the President's desk. But passing the bill was only the first step. We intend to continue to work closely with VA and the stakeholders to ensure that veterans who file an appeal receive an accurate decision in a more timely manner. And we know this will not be easy. The AMA makes significant changes to the current process, and VA faces challenges implementing the law by the anticipated effective date. But I am hopeful that the department is up to this challenge, and because it was VA itself that requested the law's February 19, 2019 effective date, to help ensure the VA's implementation of reform uses sound planning processes and practices, and the law requires a high level of transparency from VA. First of these reports, the comprehensive plan, was intended to outline how VA expects to transition to the new system while at the same time addressing the backlog of pending appeals. On November 23, 2017, VA submitted its comprehensive plan outlining its progress and timeline for implementing the new law. Unfortunately, VA's initial report lacked many details. GAO has reviewed VA's plan, and I look forward to hearing from the Comptroller General's assessment. In particular, I'm looking forward to GAO's input on how VA can better implement the reform so that we can finally have an appeals process that works for our nation's veterans. I'm also interested in learning whether there are additional efficiencies that VA can leverage to more effectively and timely process the backlog of legacy appeals, a huge deal in most districts. VA's current plan to reduce the existing backlog is to use the authority we gave it to test a new appeals system. VA's plan is called the Rapid Appeals Modernization Program, or RAMP. Under RAMP, many veterans who have appeals pending are being given the option to withdraw their existing appeal and to transfer to the new system. I have several concerns about RAMP, including why the board, which has more than 170,000 pending appeals, is not included in the program. Another concern is the lack of veteran participation in RAMP. VA has indicated that the data gathered from RAMP will help inform decisions on implementation of the reforms. However, according to VA, only 3% of eligible veterans have chosen to participate in the program. Unless more veterans participate in RAMP, it's hard to see how VA will collect enough data to develop an effective plan to successfully implement appeals reform. Realistically, VA is running out of time to address these issues if the department hopes to implement the new system by February of 2019. In light of the low participation in RAM, I'm hopeful that VA will share with us some additional ideas for a data-driven approach to prepare for full implementation of the new appeals system. I hope that we will be able to have a productive discussion on ways to assist veterans with legacy appeals and to ensure that the transition to the new system will be seamless. Comptroller General, I know that your team has been very involved in considering some of the challenges for implementation. I'm looking forward to your expertise on this issue. Everyone here wants the same thing: to develop an appeals process that will give veterans accurate and timely decisions on their claims. Before we begin the hearing, I want to say that in our last full committee hearing, I mistakenly credited the wrong Veteran Service Organization for helping with the construction of the new Aurora Hospital dedicated to treating veterans with spinal cord injuries. And I recently visited that facility. And of the many things that are not going right at that facility, this is one of the shining stars, I think. It was an incredible visit. And I think it's going to be one of the, probably, if not one of the best spinal cord injury treatment facilities in the world. I absolutely believe that. And I wanted to correct the record and personally thank the Paralyzed Veterans of America for their work in Denver and for all they do for our veterans. I want to apologize for misspeaking and look forward to continuing the invaluable partnerships and friendships we have within our VSO partners. I will now yield to Ranking Member Walz for any opening statements that he may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses here today for the work that you're doing. The Veterans Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act that passed this Congress is designed to be the most significant reform affecting VA disability compensation appeals in a generation. It also highlights something that all of us that are here are very proud of, is the bipartisan, the bicameral, and this one crossed administrations to get this right for veterans. This is a shining example of when we decide to work together, we decide to put all of our resources towards the care of veterans, how things can work. I do want to recognize the work of our subcommittee chair, Mr. Bost, and ranking member, Ms. Esty, who sponsored the original bill together, put a tremendous amount of time to get us to this point. Both of you are a credit, and I as a veteran, am grateful to see your commitment. If we get this right, the current out-of-date system we know is not serving veterans will be transformed into one that veterans can trust fairly and timely, perhaps most of all respectful of their service. Today's hearing gives us an opportunity for the committee to take a look at how VA is preparing for that February 2019 launch when the new system officially rolls out, just 12 months from basically tomorrow. I'm hoping today that we're going to hear about the plan is on track, performance measures that are in place, one that's near and dear to everyone who's been here for any amount of time, how the IT is being handled and how it is going to interplay with getting this right. Authorized staff been hired and trained, regulations are drafted and being vetted with VSO stakeholders. I want to thank GAO for the work it's done at our request to assess how the planning is going. Their report makes it clear that key elements are either incomplete or missing. This raises concerns, but I'd also like to think that and we've spoken with this, and Deputy Secretary Bowman, we talked, and I really think the attitude on this is right. Positive step forward and opportunities exist. That's our job. We're 12 months out. We're providing oversight. You're working with us. GAO is a partner to give us the points. All of those things are how it should work. Stakeholder groups are here. The VSOs and NOVA, your input's been integral in getting us to this point. Your willingness to form the work group 3 years ago and commit to passage of the Appeals Improvement Modernization Act was unprecedented. Those who are veterans of this process know this is not an easy thing to do, and that commitment to getting it right, and I think the chairman's commitment is making sure that the decisions we make here, those most impacted by them, are at the table when we make them. That is an honorable place to be. The chairman has held numerous hearings, provided a variety of stakeholder opportunities, making sure that during the entire process it was transparent, it was inclusive, we were working for a common goal, and that is something I am grateful for. If I could, Mr. Chairman, just for 30 seconds, I'd like to yield my final bit of time to one of our chief authors, Ms. Esty, the gentlewoman from Connecticut, for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Ranking Member Walz, for yielding me the time to speak a little bit about the Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act. I was proud to work on this important legislation with my colleague and friend, Mr. Bost, and we are all here in the hope that this bill and this process is actually going to allow veterans to receive a decision on their appeals in a fraction of the time that is currently taking. Whether the news is good or bad, veterans deserve to have certainty about their benefits, and they deserve to be served by a process they can trust, timeliness and accuracy. And I want to thank the many veterans and advocates who have worked with us in crafting this legislation, and you will be key in ensuring that this is implemented properly. From what I've read from the testimony submitted today, there is a great deal of work left to be done. We're going to have many questions regarding resources, timelines, and goals for successful implementation in this process. But it's my hope that with all of us working together, that's the committee, that is the VSOs, and that is all of you at the table, we can do right by our veterans, get this process moving, get it timely, and get it accurate. Thank you, and I yield back.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Thank the gentlelady. Joining us on our first panel is the Honorable Thomas Bowman, the Deputy Secretary for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and he's accompanied by Cheryl Mason, the Chairman of the Board of Veterans Appeals, and welcome to the People's House, Mr. Bowman, from the Senate side. Also, Chairman of the Board of Veterans Appeals, David McClintock, I will get that right in a second. McClintock, the Director of Appeals Management Office at the Veterans Benefits Administration, and by David Behrens, Chief Counsel, Benefits Law Group of the Office of General Counsel. The Honorable Gene Dodaro, the Comptroller General of the United States Government Accountability Office. He's accompanied by Elizabeth Curta, the Director of Education, Workforce, and Income Security Team for GAO. Thank you all for being here this morning. Deputy Secretary, Mr. Bowman, to begin, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Rowe, Ranking Member Waltz, and members of the committee. Just as you indicated, I won't go over the names of the individuals who are accompanying me. You've already done that. Is the volume on? Okay. Thank you for inviting us to discuss implementation of the Veterans Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act of 2017. VA, the Congress, VSOs, and veterans said many times before appeals modernization was long overdue. When legislation was passed after an unprecedented collaboration between congressional committees, veteran service organizations, the department, we have never seen, at least in my experience, where there has been that degree of intense collaboration over a long period of time that ultimately resulted in this legislation. The new system is easier to understand. Veterans will be able to tailor reviews to their needs, and it will provide both faster decisions and greater transparency. As we look forward, VA, we believe, is on track for full implementation by February 2019, as the legislation requires. There is still a lot of work to be done, as was mentioned, and our implementation strategy is synchronizing efforts across the department. VA is developing and updating IT systems with our digital service partners. We're hiring and training our people, gathering data for trend analysis and metric reporting. We've drafted and we're reviewing proposed regulations, which I know is of interest to the committee. We hope to publish those regulations if we can, and if they have been appropriately processed as soon as possible, but hopefully by the third quarter of the fiscal year. VA is tracking progress with timelines and goals, milestones and deadlines that will improve based upon GAO's recommendations. Once implemented, veterans can expect on average processing time of 125 days for higher level reviews and supplemental claims, and 12 months for appeals to the board when they choose direct review of the issue without a hearing or submitting additional evidence. The RAMP program, in November, we launched our pilot Rapid Appeals Modernization Program, or RAMP. Today, RAMP is giving veterans whose appeals involve compensation issues the choice to opt into the new supplemental claim and higher level review lanes. With RAMP data, veteran, congressional, and VSO feedback, we can refine the processes and correct the problems before full implementation. Over this next year, that is our obligation to work collaboratively, not only with GAO, but with the committee, veteran service organizations, and veterans themselves. We're intent on shaping a veteran-centric system that's responsive to their needs and preferences. For instance, RAMP helped us test and refine decision notices so that they are complete and easy to understand. And RAMP will help better estimate workload, design precision metrics to evaluate new processes, and forecast resourcing requirements. Mr. Chairman, we've always seen appeals modernization in two components: needed legislation to look forward and more timely resolution of legacy appeals. So while implementing the new process, we're still squarely focused on accelerating legacy appeal resolution. It's an effort we began to initiate well before modernization was passed. Last January, we realigned VBA's administrative appeals program under our Appeals Management Office. The idea being one place, one official for management oversight and accountability. That senior official in that position is here today, and that's Mr. McClinican. With that change, VBA increased appeals production by approximately 24% and decreased inventory by 10%. And VBA resolved over 124,000 appeals during the FY 2017, a 10% increase. For its own part, the board is accelerating legacy appeals resolution also. They're growing the attorney workforce, re-engineering processes, designing and testing new case review techniques, and issuing timelier decisions after hearings. In fact, today, the board will begin piloting a new interactive decision template that will help attorneys in preparing their decisions. Thanks to those changes, the board's on target to deliver over 81,000 decisions this fiscal year, 28,000 more than last fiscal year. After implementation, the board will continue maximizing efficiencies and improving technology and processes. And eligible veterans with legacy appeals before the board can choose to opt in to the new system. So both RAMP now and the opt-in choice later will let veterans choose the more efficient new system, and that will further decrease legacy inventory and provide quicker resolution for all veterans. In the area of transparency, transparency is fundamental to rebuilding veterans' trust. And it's not only trust that veterans that we are trying to develop and maintain, but also the trust of Congress, VSOs, stakeholders, and the American public. So we'll publish metrics for both the new processes and the legacy processes. In closing, I'd like to make 2 points. First, Mr. Chairman, we want to get this exactly right as you indicated in your opening. It's a period in time that we believe is seminal. We believe we've turned a corner after the hard work of 2 years that produced this legislation. We will improve during this transition period. There will be needs, there will be adjustments, and there will be changes as we go forward based upon what we learned during the RAMP process. So we welcome recommendations by you, the committee, and your staffs, any that can be offered. We encourage you to visit VBA and the board. We hope that you would see for yourself what they're doing. Words don't do it justice. And we ask that you and your field offices tell veteran constituents about the RAMP option. VBA staff in their field offices are going to be there available to you when you need them to help spread the word and educate your constituents. Secondly, Secretary Shulkin has been very clear about it. Appeals modernization is truly transformational because of the greater choice it gives veterans in the appeals process, something that has not existed until the legislation. It's change VA needs and veterans deserve. We also need truly transformational change in regard to benefits more broadly. The committee will be very involved with this effort as the Secretary looks to the future. VA benefits should be about helping veterans achieve a lifetime of independence and success. That's economic opportunity, physical and mental well-being, and financial security for the severely disabled. And veterans should know exactly what to expect when they leave the military and transition to the veteran status in a very reliable and trustworthy way. Lincoln's pledge in his second inaugural, care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow, and for his orphan, are words that often are mentioned as a starting point. We are, as far as the VA is concerned, the word care. This is part of a continuing evolution of the word care from that point in time. And a significant part of the care for veterans is what has been accomplished by this legislation. We appreciate the leadership that has been demonstrated by this committee. But before closing, sir, I would like to request formally, as we sit here today, even before we've discussed where we are with respect to a progression, not only on RAMP, but getting towards February of 2019, I would like to request that the committee invite us back before you break, during your August break, so we can give you an update, we can share with you what changes have occurred, We do expect, and we will follow through on the obligation on quarterly updates, but based upon conversations that I had with both the chairman and the ranking member last night, we are going to offer our approach that on a monthly basis, we have our staff interact with your staff to make sure that questions are answered as questions arise and not have to await a later point in time. We're working against the clock. Time is of the essence. VA, the Secretary, is committed that by February 2019, the implementation of the new program is going to be on track, and it's going to occur. Veterans deserve it, and we're going to give it to veterans. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Bowman, thank you for your testimony. It's much appreciated. Mr. Darrow, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you, Ranking Member Waltz, members of the committee. I'm very pleased to be here today to discuss GAO's analysis of VA's appeals reform plan. I'm very pleased that VA is trying new approaches to this long-standing problem. It's been on our high-risk list since 2003. I also want to commend this committee and the Congress for passing legislation and including in that legislation a set of requirements to guide VA's planning efforts. Now, our analysis of the plan against the legislative requirements showed that VA met 17 of the 22 required elements in the plan, partially met 4, and did not meet 1. Now, some of the areas where we found gaps were in the total resources needed to implement the new reform plan as well as the legacy plan, detailed metrics to track progress and to identify issues that needed attention, and also lack of milestones for reducing the legacy appeals in terms of trying to bring down the backlog and the workload. We also assessed the plan against sound planning practices that GAO has used over the years to evaluate plans across the federal government. We found that the VA was using certain sound planning practices, but we found also that there were a number of other areas that could benefit from better planning practices. For example, in performance management area, VA had not included timeliness goals for all the options that are going to be used under the new appeals program. Also, there were no measures set in a number of other areas, such as the accuracy of the reviews in terms of what was needed to be achieved, the satisfaction of the veterans with the new process or the cost involved. There was also not clear articulation of how VA was going to compare the new process to the legacy process. And also, it was not clear how they were going to align resources between the new system and the old legacy system while both were in operation over time. In terms of project management, there are a number of areas that we're still missing detailed plans. Most notable, there's not yet a complete schedule for implementing the information technology reforms that need to be made to support the appeals decision-making process. Also, in terms of managing the risk, one area that we think is, can be improved is that the Rapid Appeals Modernization Program, the RAMP program, only tests appeals that go to VBA and not to the board. And so that's going to leave a big gap in terms of trying to figure out how many veterans might directly appeal to the board and not go through the RAMP process. So we've got some suggestions for things that could be done to test that so that they'll have full information going into detailed implementation later this year. So we have a series of recommendations that we'll be making that will address all these gaps between the law and the plan, gaps between the plan and sound planning practices. We believe and strongly encourage VA to expeditiously and effectively implement our recommendations. We think this will position them to have a greater chance for success in providing more timely and efficient service to the veterans. And we think if those recommendations are not implemented effectively, that it increases the risk that this appeals process will not work as intended. So I want to assure this committee, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Walsh, and all members of the committee, GAO remains firmly committed to continuing to assess VA's efforts in this regard and continue to offer constructive suggestions so that we can achieve the outcomes, Mr. Chairman, you all met and all share, and that's better service for the veterans. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and look forward to responding to questions.
I thank the gentleman for his testimony. I'll now yield myself 5 minutes for questions, and I guess I'll start with Mr. Bowman. You just heard what Mr. Dodaro said. Do you agree with the GAO's assessments, and are you prepared to meet those 4 or 5 deficiencies, partial deficiencies and full deficiencies that he mentioned in a timely fashion?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we agree, and I can assure the committee that we're going to be working closely with GAO at every step along the way where they come up with what they think to be either additions to what has already been offered as recommendations. We will follow through unequivocally.
And the second question, which is incredibly important, is the technology piece. If you can't gather and analyze the data, we're going to just be whistling in the wind. And when we start this ramps up full essentially a year from now, this is a massive change in how things are done at VA. And with so few people, and we talked about this last night, how do we encourage, and I'm giving you an opportunity to do that for all of our members, how do we encourage more veterans to switch from a system they know to one right now that's it's new and is untried? How do we convince them to do that will help speed up their claims process? Is it to talk to us and let our people that work in our offices talk to the VSOs, the veteran service officers who work out there in the field every day with veterans? Are they informed about this?
Mr. Chairman, I think all of those are necessary components. I think the heaviest obligation is on the part of the Department of Veterans Affairs, that we need to be able to identify marketing strategies and approaches, make available the resources that are going to be necessary for that marketing approach, working collaboratively with VSOs, members of Congress, the Hill, veteran, and civic organizations out in the community. Not only the veteran service organizations. I think that the approach that we're beginning to see emerge, even though the cohort of veterans that have experienced the benefit under RAMP is very small. I think that with each success story, it can breed and it can demonstrate a message out into the community that more veterans, if you're willing to give what is being offered and explained to you as a new and different approach to resolving your appeal, each one of those can become an echo chamber on its own to further veterans. And I think that marketing, a different marketing approach, utilizing not only what we have in the community, but also whatever suggestions might be able to come from members of Congress and veteran service organizations. The obligation is for us to message to veterans that this new approach is worth their consideration.
I agree with that. And Mr. Darrow, just a couple of questions for you. When I was reading your testimony last night, what do you mean by fully addressing risk? What did that mean?
Well, the risk basically is tried to reduce the number of unknowns that you have going into your full implementation status. And right now, with the approach that's being taken to test, to use the flexibility Congress has given on the RAMP program, they're only testing veterans as it relates to exercising the 2 options to go to VBA and not directly to the board. So you really don't have any idea if you don't do more testing, and we think there could be some surveying done of veterans and whether they'd pick one option or the other. If you don't know that, you don't know how many resources to allocate to VBA or how many resources to allocate to the board going into this. And also, risk is not having a detailed plan to implement your information technology goals. There's not an integrated plan. There's a lot of things that have to be done that are interrelated. You have to have the IT systems up and running in a period of time. You have to have people brought on board and trained up to date. So there's a lot of pieces that need to come together for this to successfully be implemented. I'm also concerned that in the ramp exercise, even for the VA option, they're not allowing veterans to appeal the ramp decision until the new process is going to be implemented in February 2019. And I just don't know, and I think VA needs to try to find out whether or not that's deterring anybody from picking the ramp option even at this early stage, because their appeal gets set aside if they want to appeal. Now, if they're successful, that's a benefit and everybody wins in that case. But if not, and I don't know how that's playing into veterans' thinking. So there's a lot of risk about how veterans are going to pick among the 5 options that will be available and how VA will be positioned itself to fully implement this with as low a risk as possible.
Thank you. My time's expired. Mr. Walls, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all. Deputy Secretary Bowman, I do want to say thank you. I'm very appreciative of the attitude you've taken of seeing us as partners in this collaborative. You're very generous and I think wise decision to continue to loop us in on an ongoing basis and to view our partners at GAO as partners in excellence of delivering that. It's the right way to go. It's very refreshing, and I think it puts us all on the same page. Chair Mason, welcome to you. You haven't been spoken. I know that amongst this, you haven't got to speak yet, but we know that this is all falling on you, and grateful for that. I know that you've been out there, you've held town halls with your folks before, so I've got just a couple questions maybe coming towards you. In the early stages here, it's taken about 28 days to process the 47 claims under RAMP. Again, maybe going to that IT piece, maybe been answered, but I'd like to hear it from you. If you think that would be ready, say, for example, if the RAMP opt-ins shot up to 20,000, if we get them in. And I know right now we've got 3.5% buy-in from the folks, and I think you did this right. You went to the oldest cases first and asked those folks, but I know as a veteran myself, there is no way in hell I'm getting out of line at this point, if you will, if that's the way I think maybe they're viewing it. And now you're going to go to newer claims, which I think there's more of a chance you may see a ramp up in that. How are you measuring those? How are you going to handle for those? And I would assume you want to see an influx come because you're going to have to stress test this system now. It's the best time to do it.
Thank you, sir. I will let you know that the board is very supportive and collaboratively working with the VBA on the RAMP program. But I'm going to hand it over to Ms. McClinton because VBA is handling the RAMP. On? Is it? I'm sorry, is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, thank you. The board is supporting the RAMP initiative in the department, and we are collaboratively working with VBA and our VSO partners and GAO. VBA has the lead on the RAMP program, so to answer those specific questions, I'm going to let Mr. McClanahan take the lead on those, and I will answer anything that comes back to me.
Great.
Good morning. Excuse me. I hope that at some point real soon we have that problem where we have too many people opting in. I really do. So we're prepared for that. What our plan is that yes, the initial intake has been lower than we hoped, but as you pointed out, what we started with were absolutely the oldest appeals that we have. Right now, I can tell you the average time from initiating an appeal to opt-in for those that we've received is an average of 1,506 days. So we are truly starting with the oldest, and those are likely the ones, as we've learned, that may be less likely to opt in. So as you've said, we're starting with this month with about 10,000 new appeals, as well as continuing with the oldest. So a total of about 35,000 invitations going out this month. Now, to prepare for that, and hopefully we do get an increased workload, we will be rolling out from our Appeals Resource Center here that's processing all of them that we've received so far to regional offices. Just next week, we're starting to train the regional offices that are going to be receiving these RAMP claims first, and then we will roll to other offices as the workload increases. So we have a plan for doing that, and we're kicking it off this month.
Fabulous. Thank you. Chairwoman Mason, I would go back to you. In September, we received, and this is prior to you, we received a letter from, at that point in time, it was about 20% of your, it was 100 attorneys, and I believe at that time you had about 550, and now you're up closer to 990 or somewhere about right, expressing concern about, they described as lack of adequate training, poor working conditions, unrealistic expectations. I will say our team has been out and toured the Resources Center. I know you've held the town hall. By all accounts, a good positive feedback, and I think it's worth noting that your background and your family service is, you have deep commitment to this. A father in World War II, a brother in Vietnam, and your husband is in line, I believe, possibly on this. So could you just give us a little bit of how you're addressing that in just a short amount of time, and if you're feeling some of the, maybe the stress of that is starting to be relieved so that that workforce is prepared, trained, and ready to go?
Absolutely, sir. Since being sworn in as chairman in early December of 2017, I immediately began a series of meetings with my staff, starting with my judges and my attorneys, rolling out to the administrative team, as well as my leadership team. And the other thing that I'm doing on a regular basis is I believe communication is extremely important. And so weekly, I send out emails as to what's going on within the board, as well as what's going on in the rest of VA, so that the staff it knows what's happening. The other piece that I'm doing is I'm walking around. I'm being extremely visible. I'm being available to my staff. I think that's extremely important. That was not something that the board had seen regularly with leadership before. If they don't see me and they don't feel they can talk to me, then I'm not going to hear their concerns. As to the specifics of the letter, as with respect to training, we have a very robust training program at the board. We are currently bringing on new attorneys starting this next month, where we have a very, it's a 3-month program where we train our new attorneys. Our judges are very involved once the attorneys are handed off from the initial training. But in addition to that, we also continue to run regular training at the board to ensure that our attorneys and judges are up to speed on the latest law. We have a quality review team who looks at our quality standards, basically using a statistical standard from across the government. Our currently quality rate is 93.6%. As you did indicate, my staff has grown quite a bit this year. The staff started out the year around 667 attorneys or staff, and we're up to 940 about. We're going to 1,050 in FY18 to include, we're adding some judges to replace those who retired. So as far as the space issue, we have a very robust telework program, as well as allowing remote work, and I expect to expand and continue that as much as I can.
Well, thank you, ma'am, and it is being noticed, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mr.
John,
Walz,
you-
if I could offer just 2 comments based upon earlier questions that you had, especially with General Dodaro. The concern about not being able to have metrics and an understanding of the impact that a veteran may feel about not being able to exercise an option to go to the board. I think that is something that during this approach over the next year, that is something that we're going to have to take a stronger look at, because I think it is important, even though a veteran at the end of the day, if he's exercised his choice in 2 lanes under ramp, and you say, well, I want to appeal to the board, they can appeal, but the problem is obviously there isn't going to be any action on it until after full implementation. So I think that we're going to want to take another stronger look as to how we may be able to somehow do some assessment and testing. The other has to do with the rollout of invitations to participate in RAMP out into the regional offices. I can tell you that the Secretary's desire is to be aggressive and not passive. That the deference is going to be, we will ask and we will invite more, because the more that we ask, the greater the cohort or pool of veterans that we're going to be able to assess as to how and when and why they may or may not make a decision to enter it. So I would like to assure the committee that it's not going to be a passive approach. It's going to be, I think, an overly aggressive one as a way of gaining as much data in a short period of time that we have before full implementation.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. And I'm going to begin to insist, because we have two panels today, to be respectful to our second panel. We're going to hold you to 5 minutes. I'll now yield to our chairman of the DAMA subcommittee and lead sponsor of this bill, Mr. Boston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Secretary Urban Bowman, the comprehensive plan indicates that the VA would submit the proposed regulations to OMB on January 17, 2018. You indicated the publication in the third quarter. Has VA submitted the proposed regulations to OMB yet at all? You have not. Why not?
In the department, we're going to try and have an aggressive approach to get it out of the department over to OMB. As I indicated, it is a target.
Right.
It would be the Secretary's target to look at the third quarter. And my effort, or my responsibilities as the deputy, is going to make sure that the pressure is felt to hopefully be able to see that achieved.
And that's what's going to lead to my second part of my question, because I need to find this out, because when we put the language together, we were real clear. We worked with everybody to make sure. Will the department be prepared to fully implement the Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act on February 19, 2019, including final implementation of the regulations?
That is that's my goal, that's the Secretary's goal, and it's our intention to make sure that in February there's full implementation and that there will be regulations in place.
I'm just watching the clock click very, very rapidly, and where we're at isn't necessarily, I feel, where we need to be at this time, but we'll work with you every way we can. So I would also let, then a couple questions, Comptroller General. Does the VA comprehensive plan and processing legacy appeals and implementing the modernization appeals system fully satisfy requirements of the mandate?
No, Mr. Boss. As I mentioned, in 17 of the 22 elements that were in the plan that were fully addressed, 4 partially and 1 not addressed at all. We've pointed out where those areas are and made recommendations that VA fully implement all those different requirements.
Did the comprehensive plan include significant information that for GAO to effectively evaluate the VA's plan?
No. There's some details that are lacking, which I've talked about, and Deputy Secretary Bowman's talked about they're working on. Those details are really important details, and I think there's some areas missing. One that we pointed out in our testimony is, having defined the end state for where the VA wants to be once they have everything implemented. And along the way, what are the critical success factors in assessing RAMP and incorporating those lessons into their broader planning efforts. So there's a lot of details that need to be worked out yet, and we've made a lot of recommendations we think can help close those gaps, but they have to be expeditiously implemented in order to have timely full implementation.
Well, let me just, if I can, make a couple statements here, that the concerns that I see. When we put the language together, we worked together in a bipartisan manner, worked on it, even Congresses before us worked on seeing this issue, knew what we needed, dates we set, working with you to put those dates in place, working with VSOs to put those dates in place. My concern is that we're going to run into what the general public and especially our veterans keep seeing is that we put plans out in and set timelines through legislation, and then the implementation through the agency does not occur for whatever reason. And I'm extremely concerned because we've made a commitment to our veterans to get this problem fixed. And meeting with each one of you, we all have the same goal. And I'm not going to drag somebody over the coals here, but we must get this done. There is nothing worse than the stress that these veterans feel of sitting and waiting and trying to go through a bog of paperwork and not understanding the process and an overburdensome process that they served their time. They did what they were supposed to do. They're in a situation that they need an answer. Either agree or don't agree, but they need an answer. It puts themselves and their families in stress, and I hope that we move forward and that these dates are met. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. O'Rourke, you recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I want to thank Mr. Bost and Ms. Esty for their work on this. I also want to acknowledge Ms. Titus, who's here, who worked on this in previous Congresses and has really been a champion on this issue, and I'm so glad to see that she's here today to join us, and looking forward to her questions. Mr. Dodaro, I wonder if you might expand a little bit on some of your concerns and give us some guidance on how we can measure progress against them, because I heard you outline some missing aspects of the plan. I heard Secretary Bowman essentially agree with the assessment, and so it seems like conceptually there's agreement there, but I'd love for you to help this committee with its oversight responsibility in measuring progress against the Secretary's commitment. For example, you mentioned timeliness goals that are missing, and you said perhaps the most important thing, which is we have not defined the end state. So without that, we'll never really know how we're doing. People could say we've hired a bunch of people, we're working really hard, we process this many more claims, but if we don't have a defined end state, you know, I don't know what the goal is, and so don't know how to measure against that. Could you expand on that a little bit and perhaps give us some defined goals and when we should be able to expect progress on this? And last thing I'll say before I allow you to answer, loved hearing Secretary Bowman ask to be invited back this summer so that we could have this conversation. So Mr. Dodaro, I'll let you answer.
Yes, thank you very much. Your articulation of the situation is exactly correct. Some of the timeliness goals, for example, there are goals for the 2 VBA lanes that people could choose. There's a timeliness goal for the lane to the board where people don't submit additional evidence. But if they want to submit additional evidence, and it's either with a hearing or without a hearing, which are the other two options, there's no timeliness goals there set at all. There's goals that the VA witnesses mentioned they're working on in terms of what's the accuracy. You know, timeliness is important, but accuracy is as well. Veteran satisfaction with the process is important. There's no measures of when they're going to bring down the legacy appeal process. You could go into full implementation and still have legacy appeals there that, and without those measures, you don't know, at what point do you want to be where you have no more legacy appeals and you're only using the new options going forward. You don't really know what the resources are going to be yet in order to implement the new process, particularly as it relates to the board, because RAMP is not testing what the direct appeals to the board. And I'm pleased to see Deputy Secretary Bowman say they're going to try to do that. I think it's imperative. Under the law, the Secretary has to certify that they have all the resources that are available in order to implement the new process and handle legacy process. And under the law, they're also supposed to certify that they have all the training and everything done, and has to articulate what the outcome measures are going to be for the new system as well during that period of time. And so right now, I don't think they're prepared, to have all the information they're going to need in order to certify that they're ready to go forward. So based on the plan so far, I'm not confident that they'll be ready by February 2019 unless they deal with these gaps and have a fully informed plan and a fully informed certification.
And Secretary Bowman, thinking back to a few secretaries ago, Secretary Shinseki said, by this date certain, no first-time service-connected disability claim will languish more than 125 days. And so we knew the number of days, the date by which we were going to try to achieve that goal, and we were all marshaled around that with the resources, the oversight, the authorization, and the performance. Can you give us a similar goal for the claims that are languishing in appeals right now?
What I'd like to do is to turn that over to Chairman Mason to speak to the issue of appeals that are relative to the board, and then see where your follow-on questions would be. But the only comment I would add is that I do think, and again, it's in support of where General Dodaro is that there are gaps in the plan. GAO has identified where those gaps exist. We acknowledge they exist, and part of the responsibility, and the reason I said that we wish to be invited back, is to provide how we are going to address those gaps in a expeditious and timely manner. But I'll turn it over.
And I'll just note that I'm out of time, and so unless we have that specific answer to that specific question, I'll ask that you give that answer back to the committee in writing in a reasonable period of time.
I'll follow up.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. General Bergman, Chairman of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigation, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks all of you for being here today. Question related, but kind of unrelated. We got some World War II veterans still out there and some Korean War veterans, but especially the World War II folks are getting up there in age. When you plan and try to implement any process, you know you don't do a one-size-fits-all, because then that size fits no one. Is there currently exception for, let's say, an age, World War II veteran or Korean War veteran, to get expedited handling of their case based on age?
The basic answer is yes, and I'll turn it over to Chairman Mason to explain detail.
Yes, sir. Currently at the board, we have the advance on docket provisions where any veteran who is 75 or older has severe health issues or financial issues, or there is a provision for other situations as they motion for those. Those cases are advanced on the docket and moved forward. So that's exactly how we are working those cases.
When they are advanced, and again, could you give me a rough order of, let's say that veteran, as you described, over 75, is in dire situation. Could they expect any kind of a timeline today? Last couple of weeks, I've been back in the district and talking with, this group. And that question was asked, so I wanted to be able to give them an answer. Expectation timeline?
Well, what happens when they make the motion for the advance on the docket, we move those cases directly to the judges. That generally is a 2-week timeline, depending on the complexity of the case, but I would have to respond.
Close enough. That's great. Thank you. Because as one gentleman told me, I know I don't have much time left, but I would really appreciate an answer. And he was not mad. Just he was hopeful that he could get that. I know Deputy Secretary Bowman knows what a sand table is. When we plan, okay, that's what we do. We lay it out. In sand table terms, is it going to be possible for us, members of this committee, to see the sand table for what we're talking about here as the ramp at some point, where we can actually get a chance, whether you put it up here in D.C. and we come over to view it and get a walkthrough sooner rather than later? It can be a prototype of your model for implementation, but that would be, I believe, very helpful, because what I would expect to see on that sand table is here's the part of the process, whether it's the IT process, whether it's the notification of the veteran process as to how it's going to work. And alongside that, I'd like to see two things: the number of dollars and the number of people that are going to be applied to that particular piece of the sand table, so that now, as we add up the people and the dollars necessary to implement this new process for expediting the appeals and getting it right, and the ramp and the opt-in and the opt-out. So if we just do a process without those numbers attached to it, for us to support you in a fog of how much and how many is a challenge. So is that something that's possible?
Sir, it is possible. And what I'd like to commit to is that if you could give us about 60 days to come up with the sand on the table, and then hopefully within 90 days, then speak to committee staff indicating that we believe we have a product, and then whether it is in a roundtable or in a group session.
I would, the back of we have our roundtables here, Mr. Chairman. I think based upon what you just said in a roundtable, because we've had roundtables here, sooner rather than later. Doesn't have to be a full-up round, but it has to be that working prototype that I believe would be beneficial for all of us to be able to view.
I think that we could provide you a reliable sand table presentation within 60 days, easy.
Great. Thank you very much. I yield back.
You know, Marines speak in different languages. I'm not sure what a sand table, I know what a round table is, but maybe he can explain that later. Ms. Esty, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank our colleague, Representative Titus, who really carried the water on this project for a long time, and I'm glad she's able to be with us here today. And I want to follow up where the general left off. And following up on the Comptroller General's observation, we know you're working hard, but it is, I think none of us have any comfort to say we'll be there by April of next year, but we're not going to give you any interim timelines. Monthly reports is great, but as against what? This has to be broken down, and nowhere more in the military do they understand that. You need to have the metrics, you need to have the people and the supplies and the money in place to do that. And it just is stupefying to think that you can know you're on track and we can do our job of oversight with just, we'll get there. So I think we do need to. So I want to drill down a little bit, Deputy Secretary, on what you think you can have to us in 60 and 90 days, because I think, and that is, this is not to beat up on you at all, it's to say we have a joint responsibility to get there, and it needs to be benchmarked, and we need to see what those indicators are, what those metrics, and if it's going to take funding or personnel, or there's a problem with something, we just aren't doing our job, any of us, if we wait until April of next year and say, oh, we missed the mark on 4 or 5 of these. So can you tell me what you think you can have to us in 60 or 90 days exactly? Because I think, again, with all due respect to the general, not everybody understood exactly what was on the sand table. So if you can break that down, what you think you can provide us. Thank you.
I think that the approach, using the sand table analogy, is that we do have a starting point right now based upon what we proposed back in January that obviously was looked at by GAO, found to be deficient in a number of areas, less complete in others. I think that the approach is to start with what has been the assessment and evaluation of the deficiencies of what we are attempting to move forward with. Take a look at those deficiencies, create a depiction, whether it be fiscal, whether it be FTE, operational, timelines, and be able to demonstrate where we are against a timeline of February 2019 in those areas. At the same time, what we would be doing, hopefully in the monthly assessment discussions that we would have, is to demonstrate how improvement is being made on each of those identified deficiencies. And then improve if further needs are identified, then they're added to the depiction. So I think we start against where we know to be the deficiencies as identified. As we progress, and those that are additional ones, we add them in. But
So-
on each of them, we show solutions.
So if I may, among things we heard, timeliness,
Yeah.
accuracy metrics, I mean, these are fairly fundamental, satisfaction level,
Right.
cost. I mean, all of those are important. So,
Yes.
so let's name what those are, not just deficiencies. These are core issues about accuracy and timeliness, which is what we're after.
Sure.
Right? As well as satisfaction of veterans, which is the point of having all of this. On the ramp question, on doing this outreach, I think all of us are wondering a little bit, the uptake has been only 3%. Will you be doing an evaluation to try to figure out those who are choosing to opt in, even with these really old claims? And I agree with Mr. Waltz, it's understandable they would be unlikely to get out of line. There must be some reason. Is that VSOs, we're encouraging them to? Is that because they've despaired of ever getting a decision? You know, I think that's going to be important for us to understand, because it does go to the backlog. And I think we all share some concern that we have this new process. Are we just, is the backlog just going to fall off the table? And we've got these people who have been waiting and waiting and waiting. And so I do think it's going to be important, and I'm mindful of the timeline. So if you can get back to us on really seriously thinking what can we do as members of Congress to assist in that process?
Yes, ma'am.
In our own districts and with the VSOs to encourage uptake, but you're going to need to be ready to accept it, as Mr. O'Rourke said. We want them to accept it. That's our mission, but you need to be ready when that happens. And I'm going to yield back, and I appreciate the chairman's allowing me at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlelady, for yielding. General Bergman has asked this old Army major to yield to him 30 seconds to explain what a sand table is from a Marine, so I'm going to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Picture this table right here with a border around it and 4 to 6 inches deep in sand that we as the Marine Corps use, and we configure that sand based on the terrain we're going to fight on, disposition of our forces, enemy forces, so we can assess battle plans, assess movement, and then when we're done with that, we just level out the sand and reconfigure it for the next battle.
Well, I'm glad to know what that is. Ms. Radewagen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to welcome Deputy Secretary and the rest of the panel. Thank you for your service and for appearing here today. Mr. McClanahan, to date, how many veterans have been contacted by VA about RAMP? How many have elected to participate in the program? And of those veterans who have decided to take part, are you seeing any trends in terms of which lanes are being selected?
Yes, actually, 15,500 invitations to date. We started out with 500 in November. We went to 5,000 in December, and in January, 10,000. Keep in mind that the invitation says that you have 60 days to get back to us, but more importantly, it also recommends advice from a representative, such as a VSO or attorney that's representing the veteran, which is an important point. So far, 462 appeals have been withdrawn. That's 332 unique veterans, so some of those veterans have multiple appeals. The grant rate is 61%, which is a very high grant rate. The average time to process them, the ones that we've processed so far, is 37 days. So veterans that have been waiting, as I've said, an average of 1,500 days have received answers, whether it's a good answer or a denial in a very short period of time. We've awarded $1.5 million in retroactive benefits so far for this first cohort. Yes, we need to get that rate up, but so far there's every indication that veterans that are opting in are both getting a timely decision and a good outcome.
So what is the average timeline for a veteran electing to take part in RAMP from start to finish?
So, good question. This has to do with the issue of goals. We have always said that in the new process in VBA, the 2 VBA lanes, that our goal is an average of 125 days, and that's our goal for RAMP as well. And that's always been our position. So, because we don't have the workload yet to start rolling to regional offices, you're seeing a decision time of about 30 to 40 days, which is very fast.
So is the population of veterans being invited to participate in RAMP a statistically valid sample, you think?
I would not say that. We're not sampling and taking a sample in that way. What we're doing is, and what we've done so far is, in each appeal stage, so the 4 stages of appeals that we have in VA, we are taking the very oldest appeals in each of those stages and inviting them to opt in. What we're going to do in February is, in addition to those oldest within each of those stages, we're going to take all new appeals that have come in over the last month and invite them to opt in as well, just to, again, see what the take rate is for those newer appeals and try to draw some conclusions from that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Takano, you recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is to the VA and the GAO. In reviewing the testimony, I was disappointed to see that the GAO and VA disagree about whether or not the VA is meeting all of the requirements laid out in the law. Now, the VA is required to delineate the total resources needed for the VBA and the Board of Veterans Appeals to implement and administer the new appeals system. Now, GAO contends that the VA has not addressed this requirement, but the VA disagrees. Mr. Baumann, first to you, can you further explain why the VA believes it has met this requirement when the GAO argues otherwise?
Sir, is that with respect to the board or to the VBA?
Well, it's regarding that there seems to be this disagreement between the two entities.
Sir, what I'm going to ask is that Mr. McClanahan address the question as it relates to the specifics as to whether or not the VA has indicated that it is not, going to be able to offer those resources.
Okay.
No, I don't believe that we have a disagreement. What the GAO has done is looked at our initial submission of a plan and is offering us reasons for improving it and identifying specific improvements, which the Deputy Secretary has committed that we will work with them on. As far as the resources, currently our goal through the RAMP program is to reduce legacy appeals, and that's going to have a huge impact on how we work with GAO on what future requirements might be. So we're very early in the process on that.
Well, excuse me. In the GAO report on page 10, where you lay out your assessment, it says VA's appeals plan does not include a delineation of the total resources required by VBA and the board to implement the new system while addressing pending legacy appeals. I mean, it's in your own report. You say there's no disagreement. Can you respond to that?
That's correct. That's the one item, the one requirement that GAO has concluded that we did not address. We did not address that because we are currently running the RAMP program. It's asking us to project in the future what resources might be required to include future budget formulations and what might be required from those formulations. So I don't think we're there yet, but as the deputy has committed to, we are going to be digging into that issue. We simply don't have that future projection of resources at this point.
When do you think you'll have that projection?
Well, we will take a look at the report that GAO sends to us with its recommendations and get to work on it right away.
All right, well, thank you. Mr. Dodaro, can you add GAO's perspective on the matter, and have you seen any progress from the VA since your report came out?
We have, well, first, our perspective is they did not meet that requirement, and we maintain our position in that area. We've not had any further conversations. I'm looking forward to, based on the testimony today, to have further conversations. What I would say in this area, though, so far, VA has not done, from our standpoint, enough scenario planning and assumptions. And while I'm not completely familiar with the sand table experience, I think that's what they're talking about, and sort of saying, okay, what is our goal, and then what do we need to do to get to our goal? And so far, those two things haven't happened, and that's why they don't have total resources yet. And so going forward, they're going to have to make some assumptions. At some point, we're going to reduce all the legacy appeals. We're going to have these timeliness goals, these measures, and only then can you figure out how many resources you're going to need in order to accomplish those goals. And so there's an interrelationship between all of the findings that we've had in that report.
I believe you somewhat already answered my follow-up, which is what are the risks for the program if the VA fails to meet this requirement? Well, obviously, we're not going to be able to solve this backlog.
Yeah, there's great risk that they won't accomplish the goals of their plan or the legislation without this type of planning activities.
Thank you. In my remaining time, Mr. Chairman, I just want to also heap praise on our colleague Dina Titus. We know how hard she worked in getting this together, and it's just a testament to what can happen when members work in a bipartisan way and try to tackle a big problem. So my congratulations to her, and glad to see her today. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. I second your, associate myself with your comments. I now yield to Dr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I want to kind of build upon something the General talked about, and maybe we can call it sort of an appeals triage. Is there a process in place besides just timeline, like how long the appeal's been out there, but maybe the health of the person that's involved? Do you have a process of maybe moving people along because they're in more dire need?
Yes, sir, we do. Again, that falls under the advanced on docket specific situation where a veteran is in frail or terminal health issues. And we actually had 2 of those cases this week where the board staff, and we have a lot of these this week, but we had 2 cases in particular where board staff teamed together to get a decision out the door within a day for a veteran who was in dire need.
How do they get flagged? Do they get flagged immediately when they come in? Or?
The age cases are automatically flagged by our current VACAL system. The health situation and the financial situation are situations where we work with our VSO and our field people in VBA to let us know what the situation is with the veteran, and we communicate in that lane, so they have to let us know.
Okay. Another quick question is, you know, as we sit in our offices, we get a lot of our constituents that come forward to us and seek our assistance in the process. Where are we in the process? What's going on? Or why was I denied, et cetera. How comfortable are you with the ability to communicate back with us accurately as far as where someone might be in the process?
We can communicate with you accurately where that person is if you give us a name, or we can get that to you. We also have been working closely with Digital Service and do have something rolling out later this month where the veterans will be able to find that out electronically.
Excellent. Thank you. I'd like to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Bost.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I want to add to Ms. Titus, thank you for what you did before, because it did allow our committee to be in a position where we were advancing forward. The only thing that I do want to add, and the concerns I have, this goal of the sand table and 60 days, the concern is many of us feel like that's where we should be right now, okay? And I don't make that as a criticism. I just want you to know how vitally important it is that we move forward. Of course, remember, this old jarhead was a corporal, not an officer, so I was the guy standing behind the people who were standing at the sand table, which then trying to get the information. My question is, what are you doing to make sure that the people behind you are getting the information to you so that we can continue to move forward and do these goals and meet them on time?
Sir, we are working very closely with all of our staff. I can tell you with the board and working with VBA, I see his staff working very closely, and with our IT component. We are in constant communication. We have several things in work process right now that will be coming out to address some of the concerns GAO has in the next implementation plan. So the staff is fully engaged, and they're not standing behind us, they're at the table.
And let me tell you this, because I know the chairman and the ranking member and others have made this a commitment that this will be a focus to make sure we keep you on timeline. Mm-hmm. We've got to. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Ms. Brownlee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask, in terms of timeliness for me is obviously a very important metric, but based on the claims you have received so far, or the appeals that you've received so far, I'm also interested in the success rate as well. So we now know you're showing that the turnaround time so far is 27 or 28 days. I have no sense of what the outcomes are. Are they positive for the veteran, stayed in terms of the previous decision? Chairwoman Mason, maybe you might be the appropriate person. Oh, no? Okay.
Actually, I'd like to take a shot at answering your question. In the current appeal process, the grant rate usually hovers around 25% overall for all appeals. What we're seeing, and again, we all have to keep in mind this is a very small sample, but what we're seeing right now is a grant rate that's 61% compared to that 25%. Now, again, very small sample. And I think the one piece of the question that was asked of me before, as far as the choices that our veterans are making, we're seeing that about 2/3 of these veterans are asking for a higher level review as their first shot as they're coming into the RAMP program. So about 2/3 higher level review, about 1/3 supplemental claims, grant rate of 61%, and a decision in about 30 to 40 days. And I might point out that some of our partners in the VSOs and other stakeholders have seen some results as they're representing these people. And I think you'll see in some of their testimony and their statements that they also have some very positive outcomes to talk about.
Thank you. For me, as we proceed in this process, I certainly would like to hold on to that metric as well, just to know, particularly when we look at these legacy issues that have been out there, outstanding for so long, and to hear that 62% have been granted. You know, that's a concern for me that they've been waiting for a very long time and finally get a judgment on it. But that's an important piece, and I think is an important element to judging veteran satisfaction at the end of the day as well. I wanted to also ask, again, as we proceed, why were the Phoenix and Denver regional offices selected as part of the expansion?
So what we did is we tried to come up with a plan to figure out how much capacity we need as we're sending out these invitations. And so we staged it on a monthly basis, and we built up slowly to where we get to the point we're sending out a certain number every month, because really the issue is here, we want to process them as they're coming in. We're not shoving them till the end to create a whole
I just
new
want to know
backlog.
why Phoenix and Denver specifically
Yes,
were
so
selected.
specifically, they had the capacity there in those two stations that we thought at the time where we're first rolling out to the regional offices, it was about the size of appeals team and employees at those stations that would be appropriate for that initial rollout.
So other cities, I'm from California. I always think that California probably has a great deal of these appeals because we're a large state, but by that statement, does that mean that there are other regional offices that you didn't believe had the capacity?
So keep in mind that each of these regional offices, including our Appeals Resource Center now, is working these nationally. So it is not, when we roll out to a regional office, they're not just going to be working the appeals from that are from that jurisdiction. It's anybody who opts into RAMP and that workload is available, they'll be doing it at that station. When the workload fills to more than what they can handle, we'll roll to another station. But it's a national workload. It's just not from that jurisdiction. As far as your question about other ROs, yes, we're looking at about 10 to 15 that we would roll out to in this process.
And when would that happen?
It depends on the workload. If we get a high number of opt-ins, which is our sincere hope, then it'll be more rapid. If it's slower, then not as fast.
And what exactly are we doing to persuade veterans and the VSOs, who some are recommending that their veterans not opt into this program? What are we doing to, and I've also heard, based on the testimony, that veterans are feeling like it's just a checkoff list and maybe not really listening and taking seriously some of their recommendations. So what are we doing to overcome that objection? And I have 0 time left, but maybe I could follow up with you later.
Yes, I can provide you a detailed answer to that.
I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady, for yielding. Mr. Banks, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, I know you've touched upon this already, but do you believe that the VA really has a robust IT plan for implementing the appeals reforms?
No. I think they need a much more robust plan. The plan they have goes out about 6 months. It doesn't go out any further than that. And it's not clear when they're going to have the deliverables necessary to improve their IT capacity to accommodate the appeals process. And so I think they need a much more robust plan, and that's what we recommended. We recommended it back in March when we did our report, and we're recommending it again. They've made some headway, but not as much as needs to be made.
Between you or Deputy Secretary Bowman, I mean, how long will that take? How fast can we develop that robust IT plan?
I think the approach that we're going to take is based upon how we've looked at our approach over this next year. We are going to probably have to expedite our approach in response to what the General has indicated, but also as it relates to the plans that each VBA, VBA as well as the board has developed. It's not as robust as it needs to be. It is going to become more robust. We do believe that we have brought people aboard between our IT capability and the resources that we believe we have available to help address that. But it's not where it needs to be. I'm not going to tell you any differently. But we believe that we're going to aggressively try to put it there. One of the things that I have assured the chairman and ranking member Waltz is that we will provide a separate briefing as it relates to where we are specifically on our IT capability as we look at it today and then as we want to move forward based upon an earlier discussion last evening.
Okay. General Dodaro, can you elaborate on the importance of a balanced set of goals and measurements to put in place before testing and implementing the new appeals process?
Yes. And it's very important because there are obviously resource trade-offs between timeliness and accuracy. There's trade-offs between having a good IT system and not having an IT system. But you have to be clear on what your goals are going to be. There has to be a balance between making sure there are enough resources to VBA versus the board. And so you have to have measures in terms of how the board is going to handle things as well as VBA. So it's critical. And veteran satisfaction with the process, the communication approach. So you need all these things in a balanced scorecard to make sure that you're effectively processing timely, getting accurate decisions, people are satisfied with the system. But importantly, you have the resources allocated properly to achieve those goals. And so unless you have a balanced scorecard, and you have all these goals, you don't really know how much resources you're going to need in order to achieve those goals, to have reasonable prospects.
So we agree about that. And based upon your testimony throughout the morning, though, can you elaborate on why the VA is failing to do exactly what you just described?
Well, I defer to them to explain why not, but you know, we're trying to encourage them, strongly encourage them to implement these sound planning practices going forward. And to do some scenario planning. You really have to make some assumptions and do scenario planning at this point in order to do it. They've been a little reluctant to do that. They're also reluctant to go out further in their IT plans beyond the 6-month kind of rolling plan. They have to. I mean, there's no dates in the plan beyond February 2019 when they anticipate full implementation. So at this point, you have to make some assumptions. You have to set what your end state is, where you would like to be with your balanced scorecard, and then you figure out what kind of resources you need and have detailed metrics that you can check along the way and make progress. And so these things are all very important. They can't, I mean, the approach so far has been we're going to learn from RAMP, and then we're going to make adjustments.
With the 30 seconds I have left, Secretary Bowman, what's it going to take to get there? What the Comptroller just described?
I believe we're going to have to adjust the approach that we took to get to where we have presented under the plan and to adjust what has been identified, adjust to what has been identified as the deficiencies in how we have approached things today.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Ms. Custer, recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to thank Representative Dina Titus for her great work on this issue. Thank you for your leadership. I want to follow up on my colleague Mr. Banks' questions and dig in to the training and the IT. So this is to the VA witnesses regarding the new case flow program. Is training for this program a priority, and are your IT systems able to handle the workload during the RAMP pilot program? and the full implementation of the appeals modernization. Where are you at with training? I understand from the Comptroller General that we don't have the timeline that we need, and I agree with you. We need more specificity so that we can keep track. But where are we with training in terms of this new IT program?
I can start to the training issue specifically. We are currently working at the board with building training modules for the new implementation, the appeals modernization program, and we expect to roll out a training timeline and within the next month.
Could you get back to us and keep our committee informed? Because I think to follow up on Mr. O'Rourke, we need to know where we're going so that we can keep track of whether we're getting there.
I can follow up on that. Mr. McClanahan can answer the second part of your question, I believe.
Thank you.
Specifically, you asked about RAMP and training and related issues. As I mentioned previously.
Primarily focus on the IT. It's a whole new program, and I want to know how people are going to learn it and implement it.
So we've already developed and implemented VBMS, which is our program for VBA for processing claims. It doesn't require, the law does not require a new program. It requires some minor tweaks. We actually do have a more refined schedule than was discussed in the implementation plan. In August of 2018, about 75% of that functionality will be delivered, with the remainder delivered in December of 2018.
But aren't you trying to reach your goal January 2019? This seems a little slow. How are you going to reach your goal if you're not even delivering the product, the processes?
August 2018, 75% of the functionality that we need for February 2019 will be delivered, so that's far in advance.
But you just said December 2018.
Yes.
What's that date?
That's when the 25 remaining percent is scheduled to be delivered. So that's
30 days before the final completion?
Yes.
Okay. And I have a different question. I want to move on to the VA Central Office. I'm concerned about their ability to retain accountability and oversight over regional offices. We have this in the VISNs, we have this in a number of areas that our committee covers. And we understand, the staff has heard through the old system, the likelihood of successfully receiving your disability benefit varied greatly by geography. And I'm wondering, is there an explanation for that variance? And how are you going to overcome that going forward? Is there any standardization so that we don't have to be concerned as members of Congress that when we get the calls, it's going to be based upon our geography as to whether or not our veterans are going to have timely appeals?
And I believe you're asking about claims processing in general, correct?
Both, claims processing and the timeliness and the effectiveness of the appeals.
So a few years ago, VBA implemented, kind of around the time with VBMS, the program was developed, some functionality was added to that to develop our national work queue. The national work queue ensures that there is that consistency nationally rather than geographically. And although I'm not the expert to talk to you about that, I'm sure that we could arrange for the individuals that run that to combine
And
it.
is there standardization among the regional offices for how the claims are handled?
Yes. Every regional office is required to follow the adjudication procedures manual that prescribes specifically how to process a claim in VBA.
And do you have some kind of internal mechanism for ensuring that consistency?
Yes, there is internal reviews, quality reviews that are done on a local basis at the regional offices, as well as a national quality review program that's run by our compensation service.
Okay, thank you. I yield back
Thank you.
just as
Yielding
my
back,
time
and
is
I
up.
just pose this, if there's that standardization that's available, then why are 60% of them getting approved now? I now yield with great pleasure, I yield 5 minutes to Ms. Titus. Thank you for patiently waiting, and thank you for the work you've done on this bill. on this committee previously.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Rowe and Ranking Member Walsh, for letting me sit in with you. I miss being on this committee. It truly was a collaborative effort, and I thank you for the kind words, but we all work together on that, the VSOs, the VA, this committee, and I appreciate y'all taking this up, especially Mr. Boss and Ms. Esty. You improved on our initial work, and you followed it through, and now the implementation is so important. I just had a couple of questions. You know, my concern was always the backlog with the initial claims and then the backlog with the appeals. I worry that you have now set up a system where veterans who have chosen this new route can't appeal until it's all put in place in February of next year. Aren't we building in a mechanism that's going to create a backlog before we even get started? I think Mr. Dodaro mentioned that possibility. Have you thought about that or figured out a way to not let that happen?
Ma'am, it's a pleasure to have you here today. We are looking very closely at that. The board is currently working very strongly and physically working down the backlog for our current appeals that we have. We do have a goal set this year of 81,000 decisions, which is 28,000 more than we did last year. And with the additional staff, we are showing results. We have already done over 24,000 decisions to date in FY18. But you are correct. I'm hearing the GAO's concerns, and as the new chairman, that is something that I do have to take consideration of. I don't want to put us in a situation where we're creating a backlog from the very beginning. However, I do feel that I owe it to those veterans who are waiting currently to ensure that I'm working those legacies. And so we are very much supporting the RAMP program, very much hoping that those veterans, and working together with our VSO partners and our private bar partners to encourage veterans to opt in to get those early resolutions at faster rates before they come to the board. But you are correct. I am looking at that, and that's something we'll continue to study. And as I get more information around it, it's something that I definitely am going to take under consideration.
Thank you. I think you mentioned that 2/3 of those who are in the early program are looking for some kind of review. Would those be the ones who have to wait until next February?
No, ma'am. What I was referring to was the higher level review at the lower level. So that's where we're getting
Higher
those.
level at the lower level.
Yeah, exactly. So the higher level review and the supplemental claim lanes are done in VBA. The third lane is the appeal to the board. The way we set up this program, we designed it to get as many early resolutions as possible, actually to prevent that backlog that you're concerned about. Where that backlog might develop is at the board. If we simply let everybody opt in to the board, then yes, you'll have a huge backlog at the board. The board takes, rightfully so, more time to process an appeal than in VBA. So the intentional design was to get as many resolutions at the lowest level, again, in an average of 125 days as possible.
Right.
And that's why you're seeing this rate of about 61%, which, Mr. Chairman, by the way, does not relate to quality, but rather the time the veteran has been waiting because more evidence has been added to the appeal. So that was the intentional design of the program, was
I recall that.
to
I was there.
prevent the board from having that backlog when we start in February 2019.
I just don't want us to create a backlog before we even really get started, because you never catch up. It just continues to build. And it seems to me that that's a problem, and the controller recognized that too. My other question is that because the RAMP is a pilot program and you're only looking at a couple of the lanes and you're not going to open up the full program until next year, all this data and all this planning and all these metrics are related to what's happening in those lanes. When the whole program opens up, do we start all over from scratch, looking at what happens in the new additional lanes, or are we prepared to just move forward?
Actually, it's true that we're not, veterans cannot opt in directly to the board lane, which is the third lane that, as you said, is not being piloted. But it's not exactly true that we're not getting any information from that. When a veteran gets a decision in the RAMP program, they can appeal to the board. So the board will have that information about veterans that are interested in appealing after getting a higher level review or supplemental claim lane decision. In addition to that, we're collecting data on which lane at the board they want to go to. So we are collecting information that's relevant to the board lane. It's not an absence of information. The only thing that we're not testing is veterans that might want to go directly from an initial VBA decision directly to the board. That's correct, we're not testing that. But there's a reason. The board process, as we said, we're looking at an average of 1 year in that fastest lane at the board. We don't have time to pilot the full extent of what the law allows in February 2019, because it does take time to get through our lanes and then to get to the board and get through the board lanes, which will run slower naturally.
Do you have any concerns about that?
Yes. I think that there's, number one, once the realistic expectation for resolving all the legacy appeals? There's no timeline for that, how many resources would be required. So I think they need to establish some goals for that kind of process, that kind of outcome, so that they could take the new ramp process. The other thing is they could potentially survey some veterans to see if you had the ability to go to VBA or the board, which way would you go, to get some additional information available on that side. Because I'm concerned that once they open up all the lanes and have, they'll have some information, but it's going to be limited, that they're not going to be able to be in a position to meet all the expectations that people have for the new process, and they will not, from my understanding, is they're not going to have all the legacy appeals resolved before they start the full implementation of the new process, potentially. And then what does that mean for the process? Because veterans can still, appeal, so it's going to keep going, has a potential for creating additional backlogs.
That's my concern, too. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Gentlelady, for yielding. Mr. Arrington, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a budget hearing, and it's the most frustrating thing as a new member you want to be available and engaged, and so my apologies. This is incredibly important, and I regret not hearing your conversation and with my colleagues, and so forgive me if I repeat some of the questions or make some comments that have already been made. The thing that stands out to me is just looking at the numbers. With the overall number of 471,000 pending appeals, but when I look, and Ms. Mason, I'm going to direct my question to you. The goal at the board level is to resolve 81,000, 81,000 I think was the stated goal annually. But when you look at 2017, 90,000 appeals came through the system, and then in 2018, the projection is 93,000. It reminds me of our deficit spending and our national debt. Like, I don't know when we'll ever get to the 20 trillion national debt, because we can't even get out of deficit spending mode. How are you going to get out of deficit appeal resolution mode at that rate?
Thank you. You are correct that the board's goal this year is 81,000, and we do project approximately 93,000 coming in, and that is not an equivalent. The areas that we're looking at is our efficiencies, the new decision template we're rolling out today, piloting. We hope will assist the attorneys and the judges in their case review and decision pace. But we're going to look at that very closely to see what that does. We are also working with our digital service team. They have rolled out quite a bit of technology already to date, including Reader, the intake piece, CaseFlow, and they're getting ready to roll out the Q program and test that, which will be able to handle work on our workload, how we're going to manage our workload across the appeals and the new framework. So you're right, we're not there yet, but the other part of that is RAMP. If we do have some veterans opting into RAMP, that will take down the number of cases that are coming into the board, at the board, especially with the current 60% grant rate.
So with all the things you mentioned in play, you think you can catch up to that number of incoming and start working down that 471,000 in backlog? So with all that in play, you think you can do that, or do you need more authority, more resources, more training, more systems, more?
The 470,000 appeals are across the organization, so approximately 200,000 of those are currently at the VBA notice of disagreement level. So if those get resolved in VBA, they don't come to the board. My goal and my hope for veterans is that we stop that flow at VBA. So that's the first piece of that. As far as needing additional assistance at this time, my team has been working very hard this year, and we're seeing amazing results. And that was as a result of the money that Congress gave us in FY17. I really need to see what my team can do as we move into the new system. But, you know, the legacy piece, we're going to be watching that very closely and trying to draw those down as quickly as possible, as well as get ready for the new appeals process.
So when will we start seeing the amazing results? Because I'm not sure I'm seeing what you're seeing, or maybe I'm seeing a different scorecard.
The board to date has done 24,800 decisions, which is a record number for us to date in FY17.
Congratulations.
13,000 more than the same period last year.
Okay. What's the biggest factor in your success in solving this problem?
The biggest factor for currently to that success is the fact that we added additional people, and we are working with our staff very closely to streamline the process.
Do you need anything else from us so that in a year from now you can show us even more amazing results?
I really need your help getting the word out on RAMP and selling that out to your constituents and at the local level to opt in, because it's a program worth opting in.
Thank you for your remarks, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. And Mr. Bowman, Mr. Dodaro, thank you very much. I know you've got to leave. I'd like to ask Mr. Bowman to stay around. And just before we introduce our second panel, you know, this issue is not, it's not tax reform and funding the military and health care reform and all those glitzy things you go out and stand in front of a TV camera and explain. But to people in our district, it's incredibly important. And to a 90-year-old veteran waiting 3 or 4 or 5 years, or a Vietnam veteran who has been exposed and is waiting on a resolution, and financial circumstances come into play, it's a huge issue for them. So thank you for the work that you're doing to speed up this process. I applaud you for that. Probably of anything that any of us on this dais do that both is rewarding and frustrating is appeals process the VA has. So anything we can do, and hopefully this legislation that Ms. Titus first started and now Mr. Boston, Ms. Esty have carried through into law will help this process and speed this process up. And I hope a year from now when we're having this conversation that we have even better news. So thank you, and this panel is dismissed. And I welcome our second panel, Jim Marszalek, the National Service Director for the Disabled American Veterans. Welcome. Diane Boyd-Robber, the Executive Director of the National Organization of Veterans Advocates, and Stephen Henry, the Associate Legislative Director for Paralyzed Veterans of America. Mr. Marszalek, we'll begin with you, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Rowe, Ranking Member Waltz, and members of the committee, Thank you for inviting DEV to testify on implementation of the Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act. As National Service Director for DAV, I was pleased to work with VA, the board, and other stakeholders to develop the new framework that led to this legislation. I want to thank this committee for making comprehensive appeals reform a reality. Currently, DAV represents over 1 million veterans or survivors seeking earned benefits, making us the largest veteran service organization providing claims assistance. In addition, DAV provided representation for 31% of all appeals decided by the board in FY 2017. Mr. Chairman, although the law is not scheduled to become fully effective until February 2019, VA has already initiated a Rapid Appeals Modernization Program, commonly referred to as RAMP, to begin reducing the backlog of legacy appeals and to test elements of the new system. RAMP allows veterans with pending appeals to choose 2 new options: higher level review or a supplemental claim. They cannot elect the board option because the board will not begin processing appeals under the new system until February 2019. We work closely with VBA to fine-tune RAMP, which began rolling out last November. Since the program was only offered to a small number of veterans closest to getting a decision from the board, we aren't surprised that most choose to remain in the legacy process. However, based on preliminary data, RAMP is already showing great promise. The average time to complete a RAMP decision is 37 days. But more importantly, consider how these decisions are affecting the lives of veterans. One of the first RAMP decisions involved a Gulf War era veteran represented by DAV who filed his claim more than a decade ago. After years of appeals and remands from the board, this veteran opted into RAMP on November 16th, and just 48 days later, a grant to service connection with 100% evaluation was awarded, which resulted in over $275,000 in retroactive benefits. RAMP provided life-changing benefits to this veteran and his family. Moving forward, as word of RAMP successes begin to spread, and as VA and VSOs begin educating veterans, we expect to see participation grow. In addition, we recommend that the program be modified so that any claimant with a pending appeal can opt into RAMP, not just those receiving a formal invitation from VA. Mr. Chairman, the law requires VA to use a new decision notification letter starting in February 2019 to help veterans better understand their decisions as they consider appeal options. We are pleased that VA agreed to use a new letter for all RAMP decisions. However, they currently have to use a manual workaround because their IT system has not been updated to reflect the new letter format. VA must fix this IT issue immediately. In addition, outside of RAMP, we recommend that VA begin using a new notification letter for all claims decisions as soon as the IT system has been updated. While VBA is mostly on track with its implementation plans, the board has a number of preparations still to be completed before it can begin processing appeals under the new system, including new regulations that must be promulgated. It's critical that they are published in the Federal Register as soon as possible to avoid any delays. The board must also resolve some open questions about how appeals will be processed on the 5 new dockets the board will operate in the new system. For example, how will the board allocate resources among the various new dockets to ensure both efficiency as well as fairness for veterans who choose among their hearing and evidence options, including those with legacy appeals who have been waiting for years? While the board has set a 1-year average goal for processing appeals on the no hearing, no evidence docket, no similar targets have been established for the remaining dockets, something the board should consider. Another issue that has not been adequately addressed is how the board will treat evidence submitted prior to a requested hearing. The law only references evidence submitted at and 90 days following a hearing. However, we contend that any evidence received after the NOD but prior to a board hearing should be accepted and made part of the appeal record. Mr. Chairman, in closing, we believe that the VBA and the board are off to a good start implementing the new appeals system. DAV remains committed to working with this committee, VA, the board, and all stakeholders to ensure veterans get more timely, accurate, and fair decisions on their claims and appeals. That concludes my testimony. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robert. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Moreau, Ranking Member Walz, and members of the committee, NOVA thanks you for the opportunity to testify on whether VA's implementation of appeals reform will effectively serve veterans. Our members, a number of whom are veterans themselves, advocate before VA, the Board of Veterans' Appeals, the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, and the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. As an initial matter, NOVA appreciates VA's ongoing engagement of stakeholders in implementation planning. We hope this engagement continues and VA fully considers and deploys stakeholder feedback on proposed regulations, procedures, and forms. Today, we will address 4 primary issues: VA's comprehensive plan, concerns regarding RAMP, VA's flawed process for mailing notice, and technology. Like GAO, NOVA is concerned that VA's comprehensive plan does not yet contain sufficient detail. Throughout the plan submitted in November, VA stated it will focus resources first on implementation of the new system. VA will then allocate, quote, remaining resources, unquote, to appeals in the legacy system. Veterans with legacy appeals cannot become an afterthought. Much more detail is needed to ensure VA processes legacy appeals to their conclusion in a fair and efficient manner while fulfilling its obligations under the new program. For example, how will BVA address the backlog of pending hearing requests, currently nearly 85,000, and provide timely hearings to those in the new system who wish to be heard? Veterans need more specific answers to questions like these. VA's primary vehicle for handling legacy appeals is RAMP, a chance for early voluntary opt-in to the new system. We believe that this is less a pilot, but rather a full program for moving veterans into the new system. And as noted, there is a gap because there are no lanes to go to the board. It is critically important that VA continue to provide advocates with data on RAMP so they can evaluate the program and provide the best advice to veterans and their families. At last week's stakeholder meeting, VA stated it planned to stand up outbound call centers to contact veterans about RAMP. NOVA opposes such action. VA is providing veterans with letters, follow-up letters, and emails about RAMP. It is one thing for VA to call a veteran to verify an address or schedule a medical examination. It is another to call to try to explain a new program that could result in a veteran giving up certain rights. However well-intentioned, such calls are bound to lead to confusion and potentially contradict the advice a veteran's representative has already provided. We view this idea as counterproductive, as well as a waste of resources that can be better applied to other aspects of implementation. Next, we appreciate the RAMP team's work with NOVA to ensure attorneys and agents receive the required mail notice of VA's actions. However, VA's overall efforts in this regard remain woefully inadequate. As GAO reported several months ago, VA's outgoing mailing systems are seriously flawed. NOVA receives nearly daily complaints that important correspondence and decisions are going unmailed and unreceived. In spite of the recognized flaws, VA relies on the presumption of administrative regularity when a veteran misses a deadline due to its failure to notify. VA's process is irregular, and it further prolongs the adjudication process due to the need for more appeals. VA states it is preparing to deploy a centralized outgoing mail system, but too many veterans have been harmed. VA must do better and provide relief for these veterans, and we urge the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigation to continue its leadership in this regard. Finally, a critical step to full implementation of the new system is updated technology. Congress should continue to ensure that VA receives the resources it needs. In turn, VA must use those resources to design systems that work efficiently. At last week's stakeholder meeting, the U.S. Digital Services team demonstrated some of the work it is doing on CaseFlow, which is the replacement for BVA's outdated vehicles program, as well as other new applications designed to help veterans track their appeals. These systems must also be made available to all advocates representing our nation's veterans so they can provide them with the help they deserve. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to testify today, and I would be happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Ms. Robert. Mr. Henry, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Rowe, Ranking Member Walz, and members of the committee. Paralyzed Veterans of America would like to thank you for the opportunity to offer our views on the implementation of VA's appeal reform and if, in fact, it will effectively serve veterans. PVA employs a highly trained force of over 70 service officers who develop veterans' claims for both member and non-member clients. These frontline employees spend a minimum of 2 years in specialized training. We maintain a national appeals office staffed by attorneys and legal interns who represent clients at the Board of Veterans' Appeals, otherwise known as the Board. We also have attorneys who practice before the board, the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, and the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. While we are open to reform of the appeals process, we cannot support programs, initiatives, or pilot programs that are less advantageous for our members. We believe RAMP is good for VA and the backlog of appeals, but it is not good for our members. VA will tout their 61% grant rate of the first claims that were adjudicated. However, these claims were completed at the Appeals Management Office, not in the field. PVA contacted many of its field offices and found that in many of VA's regional offices, there is a lack of confidence of the effectiveness of the RAMP program by VA employees. Furthermore, it is a common perception of decision review officers that the board has more authority on the interpretation of regulations while adjudicating certain claims. Claims such as these are always forwarded to the board. PVA believes that RAMP is able to be successful. The culture within the VA must change. Otherwise, the RAMP program is nothing more than another layer adding more denials and longer wait times for veterans. We also found, after surveying field employees, that very few regional offices have received any training materials or tools for its employees. To date, PVA has yet to receive any training materials. The nature of RAMP places a considerable amount of responsibility on service organizations to provide the absolute best advice possible when choosing the proper lanes or to not opt in. PVA members are the most catastrophically disabled veterans, and their claims are nothing short of complex. How can we confidently communicate to our members the benefits of RAMP when the regional office staff has yet to be trained on the program? When a veteran receives a notice advising them of the RAMP program, they will receive a document many pages long containing legal jargon with the intent of explaining the pros and cons of the program. Buried deep on page 4 is a statement that notifies the veteran that by opting into the RAMP program, they must withdraw their appeals from the board, which will result in the loss of their docket date. Consequently, if the veteran chooses to return back to the board after RAMP, they will lose their place in line. Furthermore, veterans will not have the option to return to the board until February of 2019. If a veteran has opted into RAMP and during the adjudication period the claim is remanded for a new exam or further development, the veteran is no longer covered by Stigall. There is no longer protection over the remand to ensure the regional office complied with the remand order. Consequently, the claim could be denied, resulting in more waiting for the veteran. We believe VA is not implementing a pilot program. Pilot programs are small in size. However, to date, VA has contacted 15,000 veterans. On February 1, another 25,000 will be contacted, and 30,000 in March. This is not a sample size. This is an incredible amount of claims being forwarded to regional offices to limited staffs that have received little to no training on the program. The speed at which RAMP is being implemented is troubling. PVA appreciates VA's need to reform. PVA, along with other major VSOs, helped push for appeals reform. Our greatest concern is that VA may be rushing its implementation, as seen by the rapidly increasing number of veterans contacted for the pilot, without time for VA to consider the metrics of the pilot. PVA stands ready to continue to assist with reforming the appeals process to ensure our veterans receive the benefits they too rightly deserve. Thank you, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony, and I'll start out with just a couple of quick questions. And it sort of goes to both ends here. We have obviously two differences of opinion. One believes that it's working pretty well, and the other brings up some very good questions. The question for everybody on the panel is that why do you think the VA has got only a 3% intake? I have my own thoughts about that for RAMP. And are your organizations encouraging people to get into it or discouraging people to use it? And I'll just start from my left and go to the right.
Yes, thank you. Great question. We are encouraging our service officers. You know, we put out information about RAMP. Hey, this is what the program's all about. Here are the advantages of it. And frankly, I don't see that there's a huge downside to participating either, right? I mean, you're protected. Once you opt into the program, your effective date's protected. Why is there such a slow uptake? One is they reached out to the oldest appeals that are pending, and you know, some of our service officers gave us feedback. Well, this veteran has a hearing next week, you know, they've already had their hearing, whatever it may be, so they don't want to get out of line, and they don't know much about it either. There hasn't been much advertising by VA about RAMP and what it's all about. The last meeting we were at, I did encourage VA, listen, let's do some, you know, marketing and tell people about this program. We want to do it. We want to help VA. We want to encourage people to participate if it's right for them. And we've told our service officers, you have to look at the case. Is this case the right case to go forward and pick higher level review or supplemental claim? But the cases that we have opted in, we've gotten some good feedback from the veterans as well. And there's 3 in my written testimony alone that received a significant amount of benefits based upon their participation that had waited almost a decade for their cases. So there is some good, but we have to really, really watch as it grows. As we're notifying 30, 35,000 people, all right, how many people are opting in, and can we maintain that workload? And we have to do it together, and the collaboration, I think, has been good thus far.
Ms. Rawber?
We've provided training to all of our members, but we believe that that's really an individual decision that each representative needs to make with the individual veteran. As we noted in our testimony, there are no lanes at the board, so an advocate is saying to the veteran, you're going to jump out here, you're going to lose your place in line, you're withdrawing your appeals with no opportunity to come back in. I can get you this far, and yes, you'll be waiting in line when the process opens. And VA says it's going to be ready in February 2019. But if they're not ready, you've just instructed a veteran that he might be getting his appeal looked at. And, you know, we heard some testimony earlier today. I know VA is intending to be on time, but there's a little bit of suggestion here that it's not entirely clear that is going to happen. And I think that gives people some pause as to whether they should recommend this.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's exactly what it is. Mr. Henry?
PVA, we represent a very specific clientele. Our service officers work with very complex claims involving paraplegia, tetraplegia, MS, and even ALS. And we just don't know if the RAMP program is advantageous for our members. Like Mr. Marslek said, it may be good for some veterans, but right now, we don't see it very benefiting our members for PVA. So we're just going to sit back and see what happens with everybody else before we really jump in.
I appreciate that, and I think all of you, I think it's probably correct, it being new. It's difficult to jump in something new when you know where you are in line. I couldn't disagree with that at all. Mr. Henry, and you probably have already answered this, but why the PVA is concerned that VA hadn't established benchmarks to determine whether RAM's successful. You mentioned that in your testimony.
The only benchmarks that we were really made aware of were how many veterans they were looking to opt in. One of our biggest concerns is VA touts this program as being a pilot program or a test program. Test programs are used to test, or used to determine whether or not the resources are there for the final program to really be successful. And with VA not providing these benchmarks, they have absolutely nothing to measure the effectiveness of the program on. So we just don't feel that everything is there for RAMP to be successful.
Okay, thank you. My time has expired. Mr. Waltz?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for a lot of years of working these. And I do think we take our lead from your service officers. DAV's got 4,000 accredited folks out there that have worked on this. There's literally so much wealth of knowledge on how to make this happen. So this feedback today is really, really helpful. And I, too, am the communication piece is it. And I think the chairman's absolutely right. It's the devil I know is better than the devil I don't know type of thing. And I certainly know how I would view it in the line. But I think there's going to have to be, we're going to have to get to the point where we're encouraging people to get into a system that works, restoring that trust, because the ultimate goal is to get fairly adjudicated claims in the most efficient manner possible to deliver those benefits that are owed. And all of us have that same goal. And so trying to get there. This communication piece, I would, Ms. Boyd-Robber, what about all those attorneys and things that are out there and the folks that are doing this? These, little different than the VSO side of things, but in the same goal. Are you getting good information? Do they feel well-versed? Do they feel part of this process moving forward to implementation?
I would say that VA has done a better job of including us in the planning. And all the information that VA is giving us, we are disseminating to our members. But again, I would say that we really feel that it has to be an individual decision based on the specifics of an individual case. And people who are farther along in the process are just much less likely to move in.
Are anybody have it anecdotally where someone came up and said, hey, I haven't been contacted, I really want to get in this thing, how do I do it? Have you heard of that happening?
Yes, we have had veterans contact us and want to participate, but that's not currently offered at this time. That's why one of our suggestions is for VA to allow that. If we come across a veteran that's been waiting years and we think the program is going to be advantageous to them, we should be able to opt them in.
Yeah, and I think, and that's the ultimate goal. I guess maybe in this, there's more of a selective of sending it out, but when we sent it out, we didn't get as much feedback as we wanted. You would sure think that the ones who are voluntarily saying, put me in this, we would figure out a way to make that happen.
Absolutely.
So,
I think we'd like to hear more information about how VA sees that working, but we're open to discussions.
As far as I know, we've had very few veterans opt in. And like Mr. Marzek said, it's a case-by-case basis. And honestly, I'm not sure if we even told that veteran to opt in. But I know it's very few at this point.
well, and I think you bring up a very good point, and for all of us to understand, there are a multitude of veteran service organizations for a reason, for specific conflicts, for specific issues, for specific advocacy, and that's served us very well as long as we've never lost track of we're not leaving anyone behind, we're not cutting anybody out at the expense of someone else. And I think in this process you're bringing up a very, very important point about specific claims, specific group of veterans, and making sure that if it's working for one, that may not be for the other. And I don't quite have my mind wrapped around how to make that happen. I don't know exactly where that is, but it's something something for us to focus on. I think we've heard a lot about it, the not testing with the board as being a piece of it, so it probably goes, we probably are there. But I want to thank you all. I would say now, of all those years of work, all that expertise is out there processing, we need all of that right now, these 12 months. And I think we all need to say, and I don't something to think about, I'm not letting anybody off that date, but we have to be ready on that date. And if there's any indication as we get closer and closer there's not a possibility, we need to be communicating. So I thank you all, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Mr. Boss, Chairman Boss, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm really concerned as we see the spectrum of each VSO group that has their different concerns. You're from positive to really not. But that's not where I'm going to go with my questions. I've got some specifics. Ms. Robert, is NOVA concerned that the veterans, that when they receive the ramp letters, are not fully understanding them, or what the program's involved?
No, I think it's that, our members will be expecting to talk to that individual client. VA is sending the notice to the veteran, and hopefully, and as I stated, not always consistently sending the notice to the representative as is intended. But I think in each specific case, they will have that one-on-one together to talk about the specifics of the case and the notice. So I'm not so sure it's that the veteran's not understanding with the help of his counsel, but I think it's, is this the right thing for me as an individual to move into this system or not? There are concerns that Mr. Henry raised about the remand issue, and some of in the legacy system, there's more control that the board keeps over the remand, and I think there's people who perceive that as maybe being a better route for them.
Just as an individual basis?
Right, exactly.
Okay. Mr. Henry, would you like to expand on that?
From what I heard from field employees, if a veteran receives a letter without consulting their service organization first or afterwards, they're going to be confused. I was a little confused when I read the letter. So, and plus there's so much just like the whole thing about withdrawing your appeal. That's on page 4. So I think that in itself and alone should probably be, it's one of the most important aspects of this program, because once you withdraw your appeals at the board, you can't go back, and you can't go back until February of 2019. So that's extremely important for a veteran to know, and they won't know that if it's on page 4. Most veterans, when they receive these letters, they may briefly read through it, but the second they see that this program is quicker, they're going to receive a notice faster, then they're more likely to jump in. But I think it's important for the veterans to know just what exactly they're jumping into. And that's why it's so important for the service organizations to be a part of this. And like Ms. Robber said, it's important for the veterans representative to receive a copy of this letter, to know that they have been selected for this program, because then they can contact the veteran and say, look, you have this letter, let me explain it to you. Otherwise, veterans aren't going to know what they're reading, and once they see quick, they're just going to go and opt in.
So to all three of you, maybe the concerns I have is how do you advise your VSO, your actual frontline case agent, to advise them? Is it uniform between all of our VSOs, or Mr. Henry, you've kind of got a larger concern in comparison to the other organizations? And is there a uniform among your agents working for the veterans to either give a positive response towards this or a negative response, or is it just to keep them informed?
I think the biggest part is the knowledge piece and the training piece. Are they aware of it? Do they know the ramifications of it? You know, I've asked Dave McClinican to come to a conference that we have with all of our supervisors and have him get up there and talk about RAMP and what it's all about. They don't need to just hear it from me. They need to hear it from VA as well. And our whole theme of our conference is nothing changes if nothing changes. Right? Because
it's not working now.
The current process we have today is broken. We all know that, right? That's why we're here. So I did this for 10 years in the field before I came to Washington, D.C., and I have a hard time telling somebody not to opt in, right, when they're going to get a quicker decision. And let's say they're even close to getting a board decision, and they get an unfavorable decision at the local RO. The new letter they get tells them, it's more informative, right? That's one of my favorite pieces of this program is that new decision notification letter, providing more explanation about why you didn't get the benefits you were seeking. So now let's take a look at that. Let's see what evidence we need. We can go back through that claims lane. I'm going to be hard-pressed to tell someone to go directly to the board unless it's a matter of law. And if it is, let's go get in line right now. You're going to be one of the first to get your cases heard now. That's an advantage, I think, if you opted in now and got in line now, you're going to be one of the first to get heard. Yeah. So.
Well, thanks for your input, and we're going to continue to work on this, and your input is vitally important on this. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman, for yielding. Ms. Brownlee, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Henry, I appreciate your testimony, and to summarize, it sounds like you feel like it's really sort of rolling the dice, and your members have very complicated cases, which is extremely understandable. I'm just wondering, we heard the VA testify that at least based on the small population that have opted in and gone through the process, there's a 62% success rate. Can you speak to that, and do you have any of your members in that population of success?
From what I've been told, no. I think it's important to note that all the cases that VA has adjudicated so far for the RAMP has been at the Appeals Management Office. Once these claims go out into the field, now we surveyed our field employees and they told us that basically the feeling that they've received from VA is they have very little confidence in this program. The people or the representatives from VA that are going to be adjudicating these claims are decision review officers. These are men and women who have spent the majority of their time, or they have the most time, developing and deciding claims. There's a common perception within the VA with DROs that they have a very limited authority on how they can develop and basically rate claims. That's just not the case, but it's a common perception throughout VA. So if you're moving these same men and women to the same positions that are going to decide the RAMP claims, you're really not changing anything. You're going to basically put them in the same position that they were before. And we've heard that from the field. A lot of the decision review officers have said this is nothing more than another DRO review. In that case, the claims that they feel they can't rate, they're just going to push to the board anyway. Now, if this gentleman has jumped into the RAMP, that means that they can appeal their claim to board. They have to wait until 2019. And for us, like Mr. Marslak said, this may work for some veterans. It may work for some of ours, but right now, we haven't seen the specific instance where it will work for one of our veterans. We can't PVA can't use a blanket statement and say, yes, this will work for PVA. We don't know. We're going to look at it very carefully on a case-by-case basis until we specifically tell one of our veterans, yes, opt in.
And what's your feeling in terms of interacting with the VA, trying to improve upon the process as we're going through this sort of trial balloon?
I mean, there has been communication within VA and the VSOs, but it's been extremely quick. They're implementing this program very quickly. And we don't think it's a pilot program. We don't think it's a test program. They're basically trying to implement, at least that's how we feel, they're trying to implement appeals reform now. They're trying to do it quicker. And we think that they're jumping ahead of themselves, and for us, it's not advantageous for our members. And I think that I can only speak on behalf of PVA. I can't speak to Ms. Rauder's organization or Ms. Marslak's organization, but in regards to PVA, it's just not something that we see it as being very advantageous for our members.
Thank you. I need to be in the Capitol at 12:15, so I'm going to have to yield back. I did have other questions, but I want people to know that I'm leaving because I'm already late. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady, for yielding. Mr. Takano, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To any of you who may want to answer this, my first question is, how concerned are you about the fact that RAMP is not being tested at the board level?
We think that's a concern because we believe that it's difficult to counsel a veteran to go into a system where there's not completion all the way through. And yes, we understand VA's position that the gates will be open first to those individuals, but without knowing it the whole way through, I think it's difficult, and we're relying on the statement that they will be ready. I think also there is concern about how the hearing lanes are going to work. There's several different lanes that are going to be set up at the board. And as I mentioned in my testimony, there's 85,000 people waiting now already for hearings. How is that all really going to run? And I think we have concerns about that.
Fine. Anyone else want to add to that?
The biggest piece for us at the board is how they're going to operate those new dockets. You know, they have a goal for the no evidence, no hearing lane of 1 year, but there's no goal established for the hearing lane or hearing in evidence or just evidence. And we want to make sure, we're going to pay very, very close attention to that to make sure it is being operated very fairly across the board for even the legacy appeals as well.
Great. Mr. Henry, among your concerns in RAMP, if you had to highlight it, what one specific change would you like to see to make RAMP better? Maybe you can't limit yourself to one, but
I think if anything, it would be to, if the veterans choose to opt into RAMP, they don't lose their place, they don't lose their docket date at the board, and they have the chance, if they receive a negative decision through RAMP, they have the opportunity to go back to where they were before, and they don't lose their docket date.
okay. Thank you. Thank you. To all of you, have you been receiving calls from veterans who have not sent RAMP enrollment letters but want to know about RAMP?
Yes, we have received calls from veterans that are inquiring about can they participate, and we've told them no, but that is something that was in our written testimony and our oral testimony that we believe VA should open that up. If we do come across a claimant who would be perfect for RAMP, that we'd be allowed to opt them in at that time.
Thank you.
I'm not aware of calls our members are getting in that regard, no.
Mr. Henry?
I'm not aware of calls either.
Thank you. To all of you, how do you feel communication from the VA to VSOs is going? How do you feel your input is being received? And what is the average response time from the VA?
You know, in my 17 years of doing this, this is probably the best we've worked together ever. You know, I called Dave McClinican, and 2 days later, we were sitting down having a meeting about some concerns I had, and we wanted to talk about it and to get an update from him on what was going on. So I think today it's been the best it's ever been since I've been in this business in 17 years. So that is great for us to see. We are very, very happy with the collaboration of us all working together.
That's great to hear.
I have to say that I obviously represent attorneys and agents, and I will say that VA has made a concerted effort during this implementation period to continue to keep us informed. Of course, we'd always like a little bit more time to take a look and really consider the things that they're providing to us, and we really do hope that they are going to listen to the feedback and take some of the suggestions that we've made on the regs and other forms.
The communication has been good, but just from our perspective, communication has been all about RAMP. There has been a lot of communication about appeals reform. So right now, the emphasis is RAMP, RAMP, RAMP. So I think that if they put out a little bit more communication in regards to the full reform, that way we're prepared for it when it is fully implemented in 2019.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my questions. I'll yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. And first of all, I want to thank the panel. This is a great addition to the, I wish more members could have been here to hear this, but I appreciate your view because you view it at the ground level, not at 30,000-foot level. Do you have any closing comments?
No, thank you all.
I want to just finish by saying a couple things. One, I think it's a very productive meeting, and one of the focuses of this committee this year is going to be on appeals reform. We've got a couple other things on choice we have to do and asset review, but one of the major focuses is going to be on getting this right. And I remember 9 years ago, and the ranking member was here with me, that yes, the two of us here have been the longest. There were 1 million claims. I remember that number. It just startled me. In 2009, 1 million disability claims out there. And so to VA's and to your hard work, that's been reduced. But if all those numbers are fine, but there's somebody sitting waiting on a mailbox or a phone call somewhere, that one person, it's 100% of their claim hadn't been heard. And they're waiting years and years and years. So I think I heard several things from Secretary Bowman today that he's willing to come back or willing to give the committee a monthly report on where they are in this program. Number two, I've learned a sand table. I've learned a new term today. We're going to do that in 60 days, and the VA will return along with you all before the August recess to do another one of these sit-downs to see where we are. The other thing I like about this program is an opt-in program. Maybe the optics of getting a letter hard for veterans to understand. The other thing I've learned today is that, and we knew this, that each case is different, and what size may fit. It's not a size 10 shoe for everybody. It's someone has different, like your issues that Mr. Henry bring up, very complicated cases. Others may be fairly simple, although they've taken a lengthy amount of time to do this. But again, one of the things I like is you can choose to do this program or not. I think what VA is trying to do is get enough data to say when they go live in February of 19 that they're able to have the resources to do that, and they're testing it out now on a voluntary basis. So I know this entire committee, and I think I can speak for the ranking member, committed to working on this with the Department of VA, the VSOs, GAO, and anyone else really to help the VA get to a new system that ultimately gets to our goal, which is timely and accurate adjudication of these claims. So again, I want to thank you all for the witnesses for being here. I ask unanimous consent. We have several written statements that are provided for the record, be placed in the hearing record without objection, so ordered. And I also ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material without objection, so ordered. Meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Good work. Yeah, good start. Thanks, everybody.